Hello, everybody, and this is Illy alongside of Kenny here at the Smite Prime weekly tournament. We are jumping into Game 2 of Round 1, NJ Bear versus Junipera. NJ Bear on your left playing the Zeus, Junipera on your right playing the Ra. Kenny, what happened in Game 1?
In game one, we saw an Odin matchup, and Junipera was victorious, but now she has to win with the Ra against the Zeus, which is usually a matchup that is very, very focused on whether or not Ra is able to stave off the aggression that Zeus can, provide in the very early game.
Interesting play there to choose to Mana Potion out the Thoth. I mean, instinctively, I would have probably Magma Slammed the Brontus, but I mean, it does make sense. You're not going to play more than one god, so Thoth will do 4 damage if you play 2 spells anyway, or heal 2 things anyway, and you have a Thoth or a Khepri in hand, right? So interesting line.
Well, it's very interesting, especially because you know that Zeus is playing something like a judgment, and at some point the Thoth will be able to be killed, and he's running the Thanatos. So next turn the Thoth can be killed by Judgment Blood Thanatos. I'm not sure why Ra did this play, because at this point there is nothing he can do in order to heal either himself or the Thoth. And yes, he can play the Capri, but realistically, this only does 2 damage onto one target. So I don't really completely see why this was happening.
I think the idea is Juniper is expecting NJ Bear to play a god. It's the 4 mana turn for. Interest. Okay, I was kind of expecting the Khepri to hit the board because, like you said, then you could at least kill the Brontus, right?
I think
Or
it,
does
this
the
was a
Khepri doesn't hit friendly summoning stone anymore? Does it?
yeah, the Capri only doesn't damage your summoning stone. It only heals
Right.
the summoning stone, so you don't get the Thoth value out of it at 25 health. Honestly, I feel like NJ Bear made a mistake by immediately using Judgment on the Thoth, because that gave Junipera a very easy way, to um, get value out of the Thoth. I mean, he can still kill it, but he had to expend one more extra Nemesis. I don't know if it was worth it for him, but I mean, at least for now, he is ahead on board, and Ra has to climb back.
I tend to agree that using the Judgment was not actually going to achieve anything, but NJ Bear is way ahead. The double Magma Slam comes out, but this is a 7 mana free turn for NJ Bear. This to me looks like a Nike, because Nike
Either
is
it's
so
a
bad from
either
behind,
it's a
right?
Nike, either it's a Nike, or it's an Arachne and the War Behemoth, or maybe he even wants to buff the Nemesis. But the War Behemoth at this point, I feel like, is the kind of card you want to get out as soon as possible in a situation where you're already ahead. Like, War Behemoth is something you usually want to play when already a little bit ahead, because in a scenario where you're behind, you are always the one who is attacking, and your opponent will try to not give you any additional card draw. Whereas in this position, your War Behemoth can only help you, and you still have a lot of really good cards in hand that can, do you favors.
I mean, I would argue that you're up against a Ra. The whole reason why you put Nike in this list would be against a Ra or against a Nuwa. And Nuwa is tending to be more aggressive. So to me, Nike says, I want to play against Ra. And to me, that is a good turn because Nike's insane when from ahead on the board. While War Behemoth, yes, is good, but I just don't see another opportunity to even play the Nike at this point.
The thing with the Nike is it's really good when ahead, because it cannot be killed by spells. But the
Right.
thing is, if you only have a free at the enemy stone, as it was in this case, your opponent is still able to play a minion that can trade at least somewhat with the Nike. So it's hard for you, to immediately go to the summoning stone next turn, and it's after Osilla Ra with a Thoth that goes through the immunity and so on. So I feel like just playing the Nike and not being mana efficient wasn't the best play there.
Regardless, though, NJ Bear is sitting pretty on the board here with a buffed Artemis, a War Behemoth, and an Athena, while Juniper is sitting over there with only a Thoth, not looking very healthy either. I mean, this seems like NJ Bear would have to try to lose this game.
Yeah, at this point, it looks really good for NG Bear. He's ahead on board, and this is already the second Thoth that Ra has played, and he's already at 14 health. And there are 3 minions for Zeus on the board, which means either, there is a Annihilation coming down right now, which he doesn't have in his hand, or he will have to clear up the minions somehow else, which is really hard with 2 4 health minions and 1 6 health minion. So at this point, basically, as a Ra, you can just try to somehow get rid of the minions around your Summoning Stone, because next turn you want to play something that can not be traded into immediately, and the only way to achieve that at least somehow right now is getting rid of the Athena without giving
Right.
your opponent more card draw.
And it's actually going to be the Fist of the Gods coming out so that the Fire Imps trade evenly and then can attack into the War Behemoth next turn, which is a good use of that stun, I believe. And I really like what you mentioned about that was actually a great setup for Annihilation for Juniper, and NJ Bear's pretty lucky she didn't have it.
It was a pretty good setup for Annihilation, but still, even after Annihilation had come down, Junipero was still at so many cards, and there was only a 2 health Thoth on the board at this point, that even if the Annihilation had come down, the Thanatos would have been able to kill the Thoth easily, and there was so much more he could have played, like the Nike, to just reload the map. At this point, Annihilation isn't that strong in a game if you're so far behind as Ra, if your opponent is able to reload immediately.
So looking at the lines for NJ Bear here, I feel like the Ares is the immediate pick, but obviously NJ Bear is not looking at the Ares. What are the other options here with the Athena line?
I mean, he chose to play the Athena because first of all, it gets rid of the Thoth, which means there is no, really strong Thoth play possible anymore. And he also deals 2 damage to the Summoning Zone. At this point, basically, with 9 health, Ra is just, trying to survive. And if you, as an Odin, is able to kill your opponent from this 9 health, which doesn't look as hard to do, because you still have a fire giant, with those charge minions. So you're just trying to deal as much damage as possible and finish it off with a fire giant or maybe a second Artemis if you play it. There are many options for Zeus at this point.
Zeus definitely looking at those options now, and Fire Giant looks decent. You can take care of the Sobek before it gets large. You could Judgment Thanatos. Fire Giant just puts the most stuff on the board, though, right?
Yeah, it's a 5/8 on the board, right? And since you're already ahead on the board and your opponent has to stop you from getting onto a Summoning Stone, basically all he can do is either immediately get rid of it, and if this does not work, he's basically forced into, putting his units in front of the Fire Giant. So in any case, it's usually a win-win unless your opponent has the execute that would get rid of the Fire Giant immediately.
And J Bear gonna push 3 damage with that War Behemoth. There is still a Fire Giant on the board for the Ra player, and don't forget that there's a Geb in hand. So you might see 7 health, but in reality that really should be 10 health. I'm expecting to see the Geb come out this turn.
The Geb at this point doesn't really do that much because, as we said, there was no Thoth in this deck anymore. Of course, he was lucky enough to get one Thoth again. But I think the Geb usually is something you see only when you have enough minions on board, and you can also move around your Thoth in order to, make sure you hit exactly the minions you want to hit. And basically, Junipera at this point is trying to set this up, because if the Thoth survives, she has the Capri and 4 minions on board, which would get rid of pretty much everything that Zeus is playing at this point.
And this is turning around from NJ Bear in an excellent position to NJ Bear in a dangerous position for him. He is not looking as good as he was a few seconds ago, even though HP going to be down to 2 on this Summoning Stone. This is kind of why I was thinking that that Geb might come out just for the heal more than anything, because this is within Thanatos execute range now.
Yeah, but Thanatos Execute does not work anymore. They patched it out of the game, so this is not an option.
Oh,
And yeah, and I think it's a positioning error that NJ Bear just did, because there are 2 minions in the same row right now. So, Thoth can just go down to the back row, and if there is any healing effect, as we know there is with a Capri, this means that the whole row dies immediately. And, the 5/8 Fire Giant can easily be killed just with auto attacks by the by the minions that Ra already has on his stone.
Well, you can kill the Fire Giant, but then that does mean that you can't move the Thoth this turn. But that is very correct. That eventually that Thoth is going to be in a deadly position with a Capri on the board. Sacred Warrior is going to hit the board as well here. Annihilation's not going to come out just yet, but Juniper drew that card, and that is a powerhouse in this particular situation.
So at this point, she's basically trying to set up as many units as possible in front of her Summoning Stone, and also heal it in the process, because she wants to avoid a situation where something like an Artemis can finish the game immediately. At 2 health, if your opponent plays a second Artemis, your Summoning Stone is dead if he has it if your opponent has her in the hand. But at this point, he's he has a really, really strong board, and I think he's already played both of his Athenas, which means there are no other ways to
Right.
circumvent uh, the line of minions that Ra actually provided. So at this point, it's getting really, really tough for Zeus.
So he went ahead and Zeus buffed the Ares to go ahead and trade into the Fire Giant. He's got lots of large drops in hand and a couple small ones as well. I mean, to me, NJ Bear's win con right now is either develop that Brute and get it to the stone, develop the Nike and get it to stone, or just buff the crap out of that Marksman.
I mean, at this point, honestly, you're like, okay, let's try to get as many minions or units on the board as possible, just to make sure that maybe something can get through, right? Because yes, you have 5/1/1s on the board, but even if they trade into your stuff, if you have a lot of it, you may be able to get something through. And that's basically what Zeus is looking at this point, because in terms of board control, Ra at this point is so far ahead that it's really, really hard to get back. I- Zeus's minions are easily killed by the minions that Ra has on his board. And then there is so much available for him in his hand that it's going to be really hard for Zeus to just, get anywhere close to the Summoning Stone if he doesn't pull the trigger immediately and play as many minions as possible.
It looks like Juniper is realizing that she's got to keep this board as healthy as possible. She's going to go ahead, trade off these 1 health minions because they're going to die anyway when the Kepri comes out in eventuality. The Kitty Cats will do some work, though. They're going to knock out the Ares, help Thoth knock out the Nike, which was already going to be a pretty potent card. And now Juniper can just smack down the Sobek, toss out a heal, and start buffing things up.
Yeah, and the one really, really important play is honestly the Anhur, because with the Anhur,
Yeah.
you pretty much guarantee that nothing can ever happen to your stone. There is no Artemis Warcry, there is no Athena Warcry, even though we know he's already played those two. There are no Warcries anymore, and Zeus only has so many things at his disposal to get rid of a unit that is standing at the very, very back. And therefore, I feel like, even though it looked really, really bad for Junipera at the start, it feels like Zeus just doesn't have the power to finish the game anymore.
I tend to agree. And even though there's some good trades looking here, you could Nemesis the Geb trade in with the Marksman. You can toss out a couple of Apollos. You can Thanatos something. No, you can't because there's an on her. Genius. Um, there's lots of good plays available here. I almost feel like just developing the Brute on the board and just saying you're gonna have to pull the Thoth because Thoth is just gonna wreck your day right now.
I mean, at this point, we're looking at a lot of very, very low health cards for Zeus and just, just the brute. And we know that Ra has his annihilation at his disposal. So
Mhm.
at any point when Zeus decides to play a lot of low health minions and Ra does not want to trade into them somehow, there is always the possibility, he pulls the trigger. But since the Thoth is still on board, well, I mean, I can get rid of those two minions anyway because they're again in the same row as we've seen before. So at this point, it's looking really, really tough. Even though now those war cries are enabled, but at 9 health, there is nothing that Zeus can actually draw to finish the game immediately.
Little misplay there by Juniper. If you notice that she pushed the 3 damage with the Geb and put the Geb in a spot where the Sobek could not get to. So just tiny little things that maybe don't matter at this point, but you want to keep an eye on them if you're looking to improve your game. Tiny little positioning things. 8 damage really matters in the grand scheme of things. So something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it would have been 5 damage more in a summoning stone. It definitely matters. But thankfully for Junipera, at this point, your opponent is pretty much out of answers. Your opponent doesn't really play any cards that can get rid of you know, can get rid of your minions at this point. So yeah, she pulls the trigger and uses the annihilation she's had in hand for so long.
Mhm.
And at this point, she can just, whack on the stone and make sure that next turn, there will be no next turn.
Right, yeah, she's won the game. She has lethal on the board. That annihilation turn really did the work there. Juniper is going to actually claim that game 2-1. I know we you didn't get to hear our beautiful voices over the first set or the first game in the set, but it's just hashtag blame Jithens and go with it. So, guys, we'll be back with the second set in just a few minutes. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to round number 2, and it's the Zeus Juice on both sides of the board. Nawatix on your left side, Kobe on your right side, and it started off perfectly for the Zeus with the Arachne.
Yeah, it started off perfectly for the one Zeus, and well, the second Zeus answered immediately because there was a judgment coming down and getting rid of the Arachne, which is something you always want to do because she gains so much value over time, especially in a mirror matchup. She's such a valuable card that if you can get rid of her immediately, then you definitely do it.
Seems like a pretty snap Scylla play here for the right-hand Zeus. That's Kobe on the right, because you can just kill the spider, and then you have a ready-made answer for your Brontos. Apollo, though, is going to be the play.
So maybe the reason why I did that was because he he knew, okay, the 1/1 spider really doesn't do anything for me or doesn't do anything against me right now. And if the 3/3 Brontes decides to go at my stone, and hit it, then I can still buff my Apollo, and I still have my mana potion at my disposal, to play the Scylla. Maybe that's why he didn't do it, just in order to maximize what he can get out of his cards.
This turn. This turn's an interesting one because do you consider mana potioning out an Inyo? Because your Apollo's not in a great position to use the Inyo buff at this point. But you're only Thanatos executing a 2/2 Nemesis, which isn't amazing either. What do you think, Kenny?
Honestly, at this point, using the mana potion to play the Enyo doesn't really look good, right? Because the 4/4 that is currently on the board can easily become a 5/5 next turn. They can easily trade into your Enyo, and where do you want to play your flag, right? Usually you want to play your flag very close to the enemy summoning stone. So I would honestly suggest that you hold off on the Enyo as long as possible. The way he's playing right now and the thing he has chosen right now is to just play the Scylla and make her big and hope that his opponent will trade into it because next turn she will actually lose the buff again.
And I think the Zeus buff on the Scylla is very important, and it's important not to overlook it, because that stops the Thanatos execute just from coming down and slicing up Scylla. Now, you have, like you said, you'd have to trade your 4/4 or 5/5, whatever the Brontos ends up being, into the Scylla. Either that, or you can play, and personally, but it's only 5 mana. I was going to say play the Thanatos and then Judgment, but you don't have enough mana to do that.
Yeah, Thanatos plus Judgment needs 6 mana. I mean, at this point, honestly, I would wait out the Scylla because Scylla loses free attack if she is not able to kill anything next turn. I would just wait it out and play other minions, because you can kill the Apollo, granted he does not get buffed next turn. You can kill the Apollo with the Thanatos, and the Scylla still is at 2 health. So yeah, the way he's going right now, he's just playing minions on the board and is waiting out the Scylla buff, exactly as I said.
And I do like the way Nawatix is playing this. Is very patient. And I also like the way Kobe is playing this. Also fairly patient. He didn't snap the Scylla out. He's developed an Apollo instead, which is pretty valuable for him. Divine Vengeance actually going to hit the board, clearing out the Argus, clearing out the Brontos. I like that play.
Yeah, he could have played it one turn before actually, but this turn it became even better because he was able to get rid of the 1/3 that has the ability to draw cards for his master. So I completely agree. It was a really, really good play. But we saw, as I said, the setup with the Thanatos because he knew he would be able to kill the Apollo anytime anyway. So this was a really well played setup by Navatix, and that's why he's on board right now.
So now I feel like Inyo is probably the only play. You leave the flag right beside her and buff her up so that you guarantee kill everything, or you toss it all the way in the back so that if the opponent wants to kill it, they have to give up board position. And you've got that Artemis sitting in hand, a pretty shiny little card, come down, and most of the time it's going to do the 3 damage to clear one of those 2 minions.
Yeah, Artemis can either low roll or high roll. If she low rolls, she's still okay and does at least 2 damage, which can actually be rather kind of effective against many units you see as long as you have minions on the board to trade. But if you high roll, obviously you can pretty much destroy anything. And as we saw right now, you just want to get rid of that flag because your opponent would be able to play minions around the flag. And you know, at this point, Navatix just played beautifully around everything that Cope brought to the table and is still really far ahead on board.
The Artemis, though, probably gonna hit the board here. It makes sense. It's on curve, and it answers at least one thing. Aphrodite is the next card that will be drawn by Kobe and will allow that Suppress the Insolent to come down and smack the Nemesis back to the graveyard.
At this point, it's actually quite unfortunate because the only thing you can do right now is weaken the Artemis. You cannot kill her by any means. So the thing you have to resort to is just playing your minions, and next turn playing the Thanatos plus your now leader power to get rid of the Artemis. Because if you did anything else right now, and were to go aggressive with the Poseidon, he would just be easy pickings,
Ooh.
for the Artemis.
Shock and awe with the high roll, showing us the upcoming fire giant. Suppress the Insolent comes down again and slaps up the Inyo, excuse me. The silenced flag is now just going to sit there, not really being very effective, and Thanatos takes care of the Fishman.
This was actually really, really huge. Just high rolling on the Artemis meant that he was able to get rid of all the minions. If this had not been the case, and he had just gotten a 3 drop or 2 drop or maybe even 4 drop, then the board state would look completely different. But he was able to balance out the board state, and right now we're looking basically at 2 Thanatos sitting at their opponent's stone, waiting for any potential minion to spawn that they can trade effectively into.
And talking about minions spawning, that's a big boy right there. Fire Giant going to come out. Fire Imp's going to trade into the Thanatos, remove that 3/3, stop the damage to your Summoning Stone. Don't forget that Nawatix has that Kraken hero ability dealing 2 damage, and it can hit the Summoning Stone, so you have to be very careful about how much damage you take right now if you're Kobe.
That's true, but at this point, at 19 health, you're definitely out of lethal range. There is nothing that can really threaten you, and your opponent will not be able to go full face, full summoning stone in order to finish the game. So he still has to play the board game, and at this point, I mean, he basically has to play the Athena just to be somewhat board efficient, right? To be somewhat mana efficient, but the fire giant is something he still is not able to deal with, and it will inflict a lot of damage not only on the stone but also on the minions in the later turns of the game because, well, you have to play minions at some point and they can trade really effectively into the minions you just played.
And don't forget that Fire Giant does have a Warcry, so that other Shock and Awe in the hand of Kobe right now represents 4 damage, because that's fire imps that can be summoned. So never forget that the Fire Giant summoning those imps is not an effect. It is a Warcry, and that is more damage sitting in hand right now for Kobe.
Yeah, and I mean, at this point, actually, we saw how powerful Artemis can be. As I pointed out before, this one Hyro really defined the game. He was really
Yes.
far behind. Cope was really far behind, but because of this high roll that Artemis was able to get, he was able to immediately get rid of all the minions. And at this point, his enemy Navatix is on the back foot and has to try to just somehow get rid of the fire giant that is in front of his summoning stone and the minions that are right behind him, which is not an easy task.
Silence can reduce the damage that Nemesis will do next turn, and the Kiss is going to come out onto Afro so that she can trade more efficiently. But like you said, that is still a Fire Giant right there, and hey, you kind of can't deal with it right now, so you have to ignore it and pray.
Yeah, Fire Giant is a neutral unit, so the only card that can somewhat deal with it is Divine Vengeance, but it still only deals 5 damage to my knowledge. So you still have to
Yes.
trade minions into the Fire Giant, which is why Greek is not that great against against mixed armies. Either you get rid of either you get rid of your or their neutral minions, or you just get rid of their gods. But in this case, even the spell that would help you to get rid of the neutral minions doesn't help you anymore. So you basically have to play minions and hope that your opponent will not be able to get rid of your board. But at this point, it just doesn't look like it.
I feel like Fire Giant has to be the play here because otherwise there's no hope. And indeed, there was very little hope to begin with. So, surrendering is now a Tix, and Kobe is going to take game number 1. Game number 2 matchups, Kenny, what kind of deals are you expecting to come out?
I mean, it really depends. We just saw the Zeus matchup. I expect definitely something like either Yvonne is playing in the Zeus again, just to make sure
Right.
that the Zeus gets one win in, right? Because Zeus is the kind of deck you usually bring it to the table in order to counter very aggressive decks, because it has so many minions that can actually do really well against those aggressive decks, like the Thanatos that completely kills one very low minions, or you have the Arachne that has to be addressed and spawns 1/1s that can trade really effectively. So I think we will definitely see the Zeus again, just to, make sure that the Zeus gets one win in, or the series is lost anyway.
And Kobe's options then are either Ra or Odin. And if I'm Kobe and I think my opponent is going to play Zeus, I'm queuing up that Ra every day of the week.
I would totally agree, because the Odin is always susceptible to fall against those, as I said, early game units that Zeus has at this disposal, especially if you're playing something like the Rush Zeus. However, Ra is a little bit different. You can definitely beat Ra as a Zeus, but it's definitely way harder, because Ra is just trying, to get into the late game, and Zeus usually lacks the power in the early game that something like a Beast Ra or the Odin has to completely overpower the Ra, right? So sometimes you're looking at a stalemate for quite some while, and at this point, usually the Ra has the edge.
And just waiting on getting back into game here. But talk to me about what the virtues of picking Odin might be over picking the Ra into the Zeus.
I mean, lately we've seen way more mid-range oriented Odin than Rush Odins. I don't know if it changes much with the introduction of the new 2 cards. However, if we just go by the HRX qualifiers that we saw last weekend and the weekend before, I feel like um, the thing that actually can help you against the Zeus as an Odin is if you're able to have to not rely on your hero power that much, right? Because the mid-range oriented Odin actually has some higher health minions on his board, and quite a lot of minions in general are above 2 health. There is a Skadi, there is a Soul, whatever, and the Calder in conjunction with the Skadi. So if you can play the game without your hero power, then you might be well off against an Odin who cannot just use a Scylla to power her up and deny her any aggression.
And looks like we're about to get into game 2 here, and we will see exactly what the choices are. Nawatix actually puts the Zeus to bed, pulls out Bologna, and Kobe brings out Odin. We were both dead wrong.
Well, it seems like they played mind games. And
Yes.
they ended up in matchups that is something we did not expect whatsoever. But in any case, this seems to be a very aggressive deck versus an aggressive deck, because also Bellona, just like Odin, is the kind of deck that really thrives when ahead, because her ability power allows her to trade really effective in her opponent's minions, even if your opponent plays them very far back. So at this point, I feel like we're seeing who is able to gain board control early will usually, go out victorious.
Tusky coming down. Tusky the Boar, ladies and gentlemen, taking care of a hero power is the play from Nawatix. I can't pretend like I understand that line of thought.
The reason why I played it was because he had no other options, honestly.
Well,
He just had a
he had a
Pesky.
harpy, right?
No, he
He had
he
harpy.
didn't. He had a Harpy last turn. I think he didn't
Yeah,
have the Harpy, but
he did. He has
even
two harpies now. He just played the one he top decked.
like even if he had a Harpy, right? The thing is, if the boar survives, you can actually make sure your opponent is not able to be very aggressive with something like a what's it called, with a sorcerer, right? Because if you play the
Okay.
Harpy and your opponent has the sorcerer and you played the Harpy last turn, your the minion, the 1/1 warrior, will do 2 damage, and you're pretty much behind from the start. So it was a decent play. It didn't pay off in the long run, because Olin able to get rid of the um boar. But still, I think it was a good play, and was the right play, just to prevent the really strong Surtur play next turn from the Odin.
Nawatix has an interesting list, I'll say that much. He's got outmaneuvered and a Vulcan in hand. I mean, this Bologna list looks like this is just like the purest form of mid-range greed value, like hybrid. This is the list that would make me feel very happy inside, but I'm just concerned that it's too greedy.
I mean, it looks like a very, very control-based list, especially with the outmaneuvered, where you just want to make sure your opponent has less options in your hand than you do, because you will be able to play your minion again. Especially in this particular matchup, I think something like an outmaneuvered isn't that valuable, because Odin doesn't
Right.
play that many high cost cards he wouldn't be able to play immediately, right? So it's not as impactful as it would be against other cards, and Odin is basically a rush Odin. But still, I think it's still a very, very close game, and Odin is still he still has to be active, because he is pretty much the rush deck in this particular case.
Crippling Curse going to hit the board, and a little cursed warrior is going to run up and throw his life away, killing that nasty, nasty Vulcan, and full clearing the board is Kobe at this point, and he still has enough mana to develop a soul if he wants to, or Runestone.
Right, the Runestone would be a gamble, I feel like, but he takes
Yes,
it, because if he plays the Runestone as he did, he can easily get silenced,
enlisted.
or enlisted, either of those two things, which means that he basically used those 3 mana for nothing, because he was not able to get additional value, because you know he was able to play another a minion in combination with the Runestone. So I feel like developing the soul would have been the safer play, and we will definitely see the Runestone go down in this particular turn, because there is no way you want to let the Runestone live, right?
Rain of Arrows is going to come out. Okay, so he's going to Chaos Spawn and Rain of Arrows to deal with a 4/2. I feel like Dishonorable was a better option there.
I think he feels like, since there are so few units on the board for Odin, Dishonorable could actually get more value in the long term, because the way he did it right now provided him with like short-term board control, right? Because he had 2-3 on board, and his opponent had nothing on board. And Odin at this point, even though it seems to be mid-rangey oriented with the War Behemoth, still, has to be very, very proactive. So having the board control only helps you, and if you're able to make sure that your opponent will never have many cards on the board, many units on the board, the dishonorable will get so much value that you just don't want to play it immediately.
Elder Harpy and Cupid are going to grace the presence of the board here, and it's going to provide a decent board presence for Rome, but also importantly will slow down Odin because Odin wants more gas, right? And Odin right now has a War Behemoth that wants to draw cards, and in order to draw cards, you kind of got to be the attacker because the opponent really doesn't want to give you free value. There's okay, he's gonna play the Anzus. Talk me through what's going on here.
So at this point, Odin is just trying to get rid of the 4-2 in the backline that is ranged just to protect his War Behemoth. That's a really good play because if you don't do that, then you basically lose a lot of power on the board because your War Behemoth can get traded into, even though you want to draw cards. And he still has other 5-mana plays he could actually choose to do. He chooses to play the soul and not anything else. I feel like uh, maybe
Nakem.
the Nacum Warrior would have been a pretty good choice because even if your opponent decides, to really focus on it and kill it, then it's still a really big investment, right? And if you have it on your board already for next turn, then you can just send your minions into your opponent's minions, 1/1s to gain additional cards.
How do you feel about outmaneuvered on the Chaos Spawn into the Soul? And okay, never mind. I'm getting fancier. Dishonorable is going to be a play though. He was rewarded for saving that dishonorable in the end.
Yeah, as I said, he was rewarded because he felt like he could get more value out of it than before. But the one thing you're still looking at is an Odin sitting at a lot of cards in hand because
Right.
you had to get rid of the War Behemoth in a very awkward manner, I would say. So at this point, Odin is still the aggressor and is still able to just make sure you are at your summoning stone and you cannot really progress any further to threaten him.
And it's not for nothing that Nakem Warrior is still in hand for the Odin player. So Kobe has another way to refill his hand as well. And with that Gladiator out, he can spawn free 1/1s every turn, which is, needless to say, pretty good. So the situation is not yet dire for the Odin player, but I have to think this is starting to get late in the game for an Odin to take a win.
I honestly, especially in this situation, I don't think that Odin is at such a big disadvantage because we actually see cards in hand that are not rush oriented. Right? This is not a full rush Odin deck that only plays really low cost cards and tries to win the game before like turn 7 or something. This is an Odin card that actually has a finisher in Loki. This is an Odin deck that actually has quite a lot of card draw, which means he can refill and refill again and again, even in the later stages of the game. So I feel like the Odin is actually in a really good position at this point, especially with a siege in hand that could do so much damage that your opponent is looking at a very dire situation. But thankfully for Bellona, she has the bludgeon.
And thankfully for Bologna, there was very little that the Odin player could have done to play around that bludgeon.
Yeah,
And
because the Odin player tried to play around the second dishonorable, right? That's why he placed them
yeah,
this way.
right. And the fact that they did get bludgeoned means that that refill that we were talking about with that Nakem Warrior doesn't happen. And if Nautix is paying attention, he knows that one of the cards in this Odin's hand is a mana potion. So really, this Odin only has 3 cards in hand.
Yeah, at this point, Odin, despite drawing so many cards, is actually running low on resources, and Bellona or Rome in general is the kind of deck that has a lot of card control at her disposal with the Terra and the Cupid more than any other deck has at their disposal. So as an Bellona, if you're somewhat even in the game or in the match, you can just crowd control your opponent, until the end, and
Right.
there is no counterplay for them.
Interesting there the choice to not play the Enlist on the Stone or the Enlist on the Hell. There's 5 extra mana not utilized by Bellona that turn.
Yeah, the one thing that I personally think, 5 mana unplayed is something you usually don't want to see, and I feel like he would have been able to let that hell alive for just one turn and maybe develop something like a Sylvanas, right?
Right.
While killing the 1/1 that could have been potentially buffed by the hell. So I completely agree. It's a very interesting way uh to play out this turn. But I mean, at least we have to agree that at this point, it's still rather undecided who is going to win the game. And at this point, Bellona, with her like gazillion stuns, is able to just stun out everything that Odin has on his board.
Okay, I try not to harp on players too much, but order. Play the Tusky first. Tusky will decide who he wants to stun, and then you choose to stun the other one with the Terra rather than praying to RNGesus and getting the coin flip. You could have guaranteed. It turned out fine for Nauatix, but keep in mind you have to perfect these RNG plays because if you don't, eventually they're gonna bite you.
I completely agree. It would definitely have been the better sequencing at this point. And I mean, right now, honestly, the one thing that's really missing for Odin is a weakening curse. I think have we seen one weakening
Yes.
curse? We have seen one.
We've seen
Because
one, which was played on a Vulcan.
yeah, because the weakening curse we've done quite a lot. And at this point we see the power of, Bellona's hero ability that allows her to just place the minions in a way that allows her to get rid of them, 3 of them immediately. Because Odin usually, as we said, has a lot of low health minions, which means that they're all susceptible to be killed by something like the bludgeon.
And the choice here now for Odin is how aggressive, how passive can he afford to be? He's held this siege for a really long time. Siege, for those of you who don't know, is a +2 buff to all friendly units currently on the field, but only when attacking the Summoning Stone. The fact that the siege didn't come out cost him 6 damage right there, and I don't think there's going to be another opportunity to play it.
Yeah, I think Bellona, in a sense, was rather lucky because Odin didn't really have many
There it is.
plays at this point, right? So he wasn't able to get rid of the Terra. He wasn't able to set up a significant board control. And at this point, you're looking at a Fire Giant and a Terra at Odin's Stone, which means that you will always be, under pressure. At this point, you basically have lost board control for the rest of the game if you're Odin. So all you can do is just try to somehow make sure your opponent dies before, your opponent is able to finish you with his stronger minions, right?
And it'll be interesting to me to see exactly what Kobe can do from this point because I don't see a way for the Odin player to even get back into this game. I know that you were talking about how hey this player has built a list that wants to refill that to an extent wants to go to late game, but you just can't beat the value and the greed that is inherent in Nauatix's deck. This is the environment that Nauatix's deck lives for.
I mean, you can definitely win against the Bellona because, as I said, Bellona relies heavily on stuns and also having board control. So if you're Odin and you manage to get board control very early, then it's really hard for the Bellona to get back into the game because you can play around something like a Dishonorable. You can also play around the Bludgeon. So if you win the early game, then it's one thing. But the thing is, Odin wasn't strong enough to win the early game, like hard enough to set up his minions in a way that can actually threaten his opponent's summoning stone. He's been trying to set up a couple of minions around Bellona Summoning Stone for quite some while just to get the siege value in, but
Mhm.
Bellona completely countered this by just getting rid of everything every single turn.
And now the Sylvanas has hit the board. You've already seen the Chaos spawns out from the Odin player. There won't be any more of those in his list. And there, to me, at this point, the game has been over for several turns. Once that Fire Giant and Terra hit the board, like you said, and Odin is under pressure and has lost board control, there is no way back into it. And by my book.
I think there you still have the ability to kill off your opponent if you draw the right cards. Because if you look at Odin's hand, not only did he play the Loki, but he also has the Fatalis in hand. So granted he has the right hand at the right time, he can actually kill off the opponent from a pretty high health, right? But since he didn't draw those cards in time, and he had to expend his minions in a way that were made it possible for his opponent to get rid of it, there is no real way to threaten the summoning zone in a way that would, allow him lethal in the next turns.
And all of this stuff, all of the options that could be drawn by Odin require a path to the Summoning Stone, except Loki. We've already seen the Loki hit the board. So I don't think there is another option other than Web of Word tech, maybe, that could possibly give way to anything that remotely resembles victory.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, honestly, it's pretty much over because you cannot get rid of the minions that your opponent has on board, and your opponent pretty much has lethal on the board if he's able to displace the Surtra, which he definitely will be able to because it's a Bellona.
Bologna,
So
right.
yeah, it's game over at this point.
Interesting, chose to blink the Gladiator. Didn't want to be rude and move around his opponent's units, but that does mean Nauatix claims the second game in the mind game weird, like, didn't play Odin, chose to play Bologna, but it worked for him. Interesting greedy list. Honestly, not a matchup I would consider favorable for Bologna. So going into the third set here, or into the third game rather, of the second set, Nauatix could be looking at a favorable matchup.
I mean, the oddest thing actually that I've seen in this Odin list was the Fatalis plus the Loki. I feel like usually if you play those two cards, then you're taking a really high risk because if you have those in your hand or really early in the game, then there is not much you can actually do, and especially against the Bellona. In this case, actually, Bellona is really good because she has board control that does not apply onto one single target. She applies it on, either a column or a row. So that's really strong against something like a Loki. So I feel like, especially with this kind of Odin deck, you are, at a pretty much disadvantage from the get-go.
That's fair enough. And taking into game three, though, Nauatix has a choice of either Zeus or Nuwa. Kobe has a choice of either what would it be? Ra. No, he won. Did he win the Ra game?
There was no Ra game.
Okay. But I think that's the one. Yeah, he won the Ra game, so he's got a choice of either Zeus or no. It was a Zeus mirror. So he's got Ra or Odin for the last game against Nauatix's Zeus or Nuwa.
Yeah, and in the third game, we see the Zeus versus Odin. And as I said before, Zeus versus Odin is actually a decent matchup for the Zeus. It really depends on your early game draws, obviously. But if you have something like an Arachne or a Scylla in hand that can deal really, really well with the incoming 1/1s that Odin sends to your stone, then you will usually have the advantage in this particular matchup.
I gotta feel like Gift of Moonin could be a correct play. Surtur's actually gonna come out as a setup maybe for next turn. Obviously the 1/1 buff with Surtur can clear off the Scylla if the Scylla decides to move into range of that particular ability. And I suppose you can always Moonin her later.
Yeah, and as I said, I think last time we saw Zeus. Zeus is only strong for Scylla is only strong for one turn. So if you can somehow avoid her for one turn, you don't have to immediately get rid of her, right? And that's the way we actually saw Odin go. He feels like, well, I mean, the Scylla will become weak next turn, so why do I even bother killing it? It's just a 1/2.
Freya in hand for the Odin player. So that is an option for Kobe here to wait until that turn 6 and then kind of clean house. So he doesn't have to rush too much right now, I don't feel like.
He doesn't have to rush too much. I would still, consider maybe using the Chaos Spawn onto the Arachne because you don't want
Yeah.
to, you don't want too many 1/1 Spirelings on the board because those can be really, really disruptive. And you also don't want to not do anything for one turn, aside from being the hero power, which he chooses to do. I don't know if this was the correct play because he basically traded 2 mana, in this case 4 mana, because it didn't do anything for the other 2 mana, just to get rid of Arachne 1/1 that didn't cost anything.
Nemesis is going to hit the board here. This is going to allow Scylla to be buffed up again, I believe, if he takes the path. And indeed, Scylla is now a 5/3, getting bigger and bigger every day. Is it now big enough to moon in, or do we still wait?
I mean, at this point, you definitely want to get rid of the Scylla, but she's still on the very, very back. And now we actually see why maybe the Chaos Spawn would have been a better play, because if the Chaos Spawn had been alive, Arachne would not have been able to move up whatsoever. He would still have more board control, and he basically he has to use all his mana just to get rid of the weakest minions that that Zeus has on the board. So at this point, it doesn't really look that great for Odin, even with Freya in hand, because she only deals 2 damage.
Right. And Freya's a powerful card, but speaking of powerful cards, Artemis and Nemesis are both drawn, and Nemesis is actually an insane card when you think about it. Argus gonna hit the board though, more fuel for the Zeus juice.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Zeus is like, well, I mean, my opponent doesn't have anything to threaten me. I'll just put my minions on the back row and let him aggress onto me, right? Because I
Right.
usually have the more game-changing answers to him with a Thanatos or a Scylla, something like that. At this point, you're kind of forced into Freya, I feel like,
Right.
because
I tend to agree.
you want to move up, and you cannot, let those minions just stick on the board forever. And that's why we see the Freya, because even though it doesn't feel that great, usually you want to play the Freya to either finish off your opponent or to make a play that gains you a lot of board control. But at this point, you're basically stalling and making sure those minions cannot harm your Surtra.
It's kind of it's one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of this particular Odin list. It seems like the Odin list is based around buff the Loki, make the Loki do a lot of damage, and it's a good thought, and it's one that I played around with actually quite a bit at the beginning of well, actually it would have been quite a few patches ago at this point. But the problem with this OTK style list is it lacks the early game oomph. And if you don't have that early game oomph, then you are solely relying on drawing your Loki combo to deal a lot of damage in one turn, which doesn't always win the game.
You're basically relying on being able to be somewhat competitive on the board while still dealing damage to the summoning stone to a
Right.
point where you can finish off the summoning stone with your Loki in combination with the haste and fatalis. And I mean, at this point, I think that's the reason why we see Odin go so aggressive and even putting the Freya up, knowing that he can only get rid of one of those minions that Su still has on the board, because he really wants to get that damage in. Everything that he has in hand or in his deck really screams like, okay, I really just want to get damage in and draw my cards.
Artemis going to hit the board just enough damage to kill off the Freya. Nemesis gonna trade into the Argus, and just like that, Kobe has completely lost the board. There's an Inyo flag and an Artemis sitting on the board, and he has not yet drawn any piece of his combo other than Siege.
Yeah, again, at this point, the one thing he can do, he can play minions in the very far back of his summoning stone just to make sure that Artemis cannot hit it, and he has still 25 health. So he's not in a rush, right? He's not in a rush. And maybe to set up for next turn where he can do quite way more damage with the Thor and maybe a charged up minion to really threaten the summoning stone. But as we see, and as I said before, Zeus has so many answers against Odin's minions that at this point it's so hard. It's so hard to just get any damage on the summoning stone.
Here's a question for you, and I actually don't know the answer to this because I haven't played with the card. Shock and Awe selects a friendly unit after silencing an enemy unit and triggers their war cry. What if
Right.
that
Yes.
friendly unit is silenced?
Actually, that's
Does
a
it?
really good question. But
Because then there might be some value to chaos spawning the Artemis, right?
yeah, there might be some value, but I still wouldn't recommend it because at this point, the shock and awe is the least of your concerns.
Right. I'm not
At
saying
this
it's a
point,
great play at this point in time, but just something to think about, you know? How does that
yeah,
interaction work?
I think it will still work, even if it's silenced, but I'm not completely
That's my
sure.
instinct. Yeah.
But
That is something to check out
whatever
later.
the case is, whatever the case is in this particular game, he used the Thor just to get rid of one of Zeus's minions and weaken the Artemis, and there is still a Thanatos alive. So it looks really really bleak for the Odin player because 17 health is too much even with a Loki plus anything that he has in his deck. It's just not doable.
It's certainly looking good for Nawatix at this point. Fire Giant is actually going to come out, and 2 Fire Imps will grace the board. One of them will certainly push into the Summoning Stone. Actually, both of them will, because that's how movement works. And Fire Giant, oh, by the way, he's also there.
Yeah. So at this point, you kind of have to get rid of the Fire Giant. I mean, it has 8 health, so you kind of
Kinda.
have to use the Crippling Curse plus your leader ability.
Cursed Warrior, yeah.
Yeah, but in any case, at this point, you're looking at a lost board, and your opponent is still at such a high health that whatever you draw at this point, it simply will not help you.
Brontus Artemis? What do you think? Artemis? I feel like you might as well just play the Artemis, and that's a 6 damage to the stone, I think? With that in the game right now, that's 4 down to 8, plus 4 plus... Yeah, that ends the game, right? Oh no, it's off by 1.
Close. It's very close. But at this point, it's basically game because you know that
Yeah.
Odin has no AoE that will destroy all of those minions. It's simply impossible for Odin to retaliate, which means that Zeus will be the victor of this game.
And I want to highlight the one more thing, though. What I mentioned earlier. This Odin list works, right? The siege buff Loki hasten fatalis with a frenzy or some other Surtur buff or a the other card that's interesting in this list is the it's the Scion of Doom works out fairly well. Venator works out fairly well. But the problem with it, and you have to be very, very conscious of the weakness, is that you are cutting a lot of your early game presence. An early game in a mana scaling card game like Hand of the Gods is super important.
Yeah, just being able to play minions or units on curve is really, really important, especially if you play something like the Odin. And even if you have the right combo, first of all, you have to get to the right mana in order to even be able to pull off the combo. And until this particular turn, you still have to be able to inflict enough damage onto the Odin Summoning Stone to to finish him off with your combo. And in both of those Odin games, we actually saw Odin fall flat completely. There was almost no damage on the Summoning Stone in those games. Like maybe 7, 8 damage, but that's it's just not enough to really threaten your opponent, especially in those very early turns as we saw those games end. It's just not enough.
And that is it's a lot of breakdown for a lot of interesting lists in that set there. We are going into the next set here. Just another couple minutes. It'll be Swagasaurus Rex taking on Denim Blue number 7. So stick around, give us a couple minutes, and we'll be right back. Hello, guys, and welcome back. We're in round number 3. These semifinals. Actually, I believe they are Denim Blue on the left with that beautiful new Swagasaurus Rex sitting on your right with DJ Zeus bringing up the back. This looks like a Spell list taking on a pretty typical Zeus list. Kenny, matchup, please.
So this looks like a control Nuva, honestly. So the thing with control Nuva is either you're able to exert board control very early in the game just by using your Habwa to recall anything that your opponent plays, which means that you can usually get one of your minions onto their summoning stone. But even if you are not able to do so, you still you can still wait on something like a Guan Yu to get rid of your opponent's board in just one turn. and swing around the game this way. I feel like in this particular matchup, Odin is a little bit under pressure because he knows he's playing against a Guan Yu maybe in the later
The
stages of
Zeus
the
rather.
game. The Zeus is at a disadvantage because he knows he's playing against a Guan Yu in the later stages of the game. So you don't want to just stack your minions in the back row. You kind of want to do something because Nuva in this situation will usually win out.
Well, Nuwa, I think the perception is that Nuwa will win because Nuwa can control whatever Zeus throws. But at some point, do the Zeus minions just get too much health and become too hard to remove? I mean, and also don't forget there's the possibility of a Nike getting teched in.
Yes, but the Nike will still get the damage from Guan Yu, for instance, right? And there is still something like a Sun Wukong in Nuva's deck, which means that the moment Sun Wukong is being played, he will probably use it in order to provide his minions with more movement speed, which means there will be more trade options for him available. In pretty much in any case, like Nuva has the upper hand when it comes to just really, really strong, let's say, board control turns. Let's put it this way. So I feel like Nuva is still really, really good, just getting her crescent blades and making sure that her opponent, doesn't threaten her in any way. And this way she can just either wait out or try to, aggress as we saw with the Habwa in this particular case.
And there's a lot of pressure being put on by Nuwa at the moment. I know that you were talking about how Zeus generally has the early game in this particular matchup. But in this particular game, I can tell you that Zeus most certainly does not have the early game advantage. Do you what are the lines that you see here for the Zeus player to get a little something back?
Honestly, at this point, I feel like the only thing that he could possibly do is to get rid of the Imp Guard as soon as possible. He kind of has to use his mana potion and the Athena just to deal some damage on the Imp Guard and the 4/4. But he actually chooses. Oh, okay, yeah, he can get rid of the Imp Guard with the buffed up Brontes. But the Imp Guard
Okay.
was the most important thing, because the Imp Guard on your Summoning Stone is able to trade so well in combination just with the Nuva hero power that you always want to get rid of it the moment it just approaches your Summoning Stone.
Imperial Guard used to be a staple in literally every single list that could run it, which was only Nuwa. And the reason for that was because of the free trade, the pardon effect, which is, needless to say, very powerful. Interesting choice there to use the 0 mana Crescent Blade rather than the 1 mana Crescent Blade, so he must be planning on using all available mana then, right? Maybe
Uh,
that was
it,
a misclick.
I think it was a misclick because there are no really available options, but in the end, it doesn't really matter, right? Because usually you will play something like a War Behemoth just to get more card draw in, I suppose, or the Hydra just to make sure your opponent is under pressure and has to utilize some of his mana to spend on the Poisonous card. He uses the War Behemoth, but I think any card would be okay. And next turn, the 0 mana Crescent Blade would have been 1 mana anyway. So in this
Right.
particular case, it doesn't matter.
So then the play is for my man Swagasaurus Rex. Who else would bring DJ Zeus except for somebody named Swagasaurus Rex? I mean, honestly, uh, his play. I think it's just Athena again, right?
It's not a good play, but it's the
Yeah,
only
I
play
agree.
he has at this disposal, honestly. And that's why I actually suggested last turn to play the Athena more
Mm-hmm.
into the direction of the other two minions and not kill off the Habwa.
Right.
Because if your opponent just runs away from your Athena as the gladiator did, then you can't fall anymore as it is in this position. So the Athena cannot kill the gladiator. She just has to just wait for what happens.
Interesting positioning there. Zeus deciding not to attack into the War Behemoth, letting the Athena just body block, forcing Nuwa to take the initiative, so to speak. And I'm feeling Lenny. I don't know about you, but I'm really feeling Lenny right now. It's 7 mana. It feels real good.
Honestly, if I were in Nuva's position right now, I definitely would consider it, but I wouldn't play it because it's still very susceptible to be like weak against something like silence, and we have not seen a single silence. It's a 7 mana investment for a 5/5 that can easily get killed by a silence, and there are Phoenix on the field that do 2 damage, right? So if your opponent has the silence effect in hand, he can get rid of your gladiator immediately, silence the Hydra, and yeah, but he still does it. I still don't think it was the right play, but it's the play he went for.
I think this is under the mentality of if they don't have the silence, I win the game. If they do have the silence, well, I still have other uh, resources at my disposal anyway. So I like it. I think it's risky, and I agree that there are other plays that maybe are more consistent. But this is the more volatile. You know what? I'm going to lay my cards on the table. You probably only have 2 silence effects in your list. Show me one of them, or I take the trophy. Well, not a
That's
trophy,
true.
but
Yeah, that's true. He risked it all. Like if there was the shock and awe in Zeus's hand, then this turn would be really, really bleak for the Nova player, honestly.
I don't think it's that bleak though.
Yeah, if the shock and awe was in Zeus's hand, he would be able to get rid of the 4/2 gladiator, the 3/5 the 3/5 war behemoth, and block the lane and keep his minions alive. He would have been able to do any of those things plus play one more minions with the shock and awe. So it would look way worse.
But in this universe, no shock and awe was drawn this day, and Lenny is looking real sexy right now, about to run down that lane and deal with whichever one of these minions he wants to. And then you still have the option as the new player to develop more stuff.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, your Hydra is basically invincible, right? Because it only
Yeah.
takes 1 damage. You can trade against whatever you want to. Usually, the most important trade target is obviously the Brontes because it's the only thing that can actually grow, and it also has the most attack and defense at this point.
Right.
And I mean, the one thing that is really unfortunate for him, he doesn't have the Nuva at this point, right? But you can
The
get
Guan
rid
Yu.
of a lot, the Guan Yu at this point, yes. But you can still get rid of a lot of those minions just with the protection onto anything, honestly, or because you will only take 1 damage. Anything, protection on anything, get rid of the Athena with your second Crescent Blade, and kill 3 out of those 4 minions. He doesn't go that route, he goes full face, which is something, you see when you feel like, okay, your opponent will not be able to do anything about it, and since you didn't see a silence effect from Zeus, it might be the winning play.
I think that's very in line with the last play of playing Lenny to begin with. Is saying, you know what? Like you said, there was no silence effect last turn. That means there is a 2 in 13 that you find it this turn. I'm gonna take those odds. I'm gonna gamble it. Throw Lenny at your summoning stone and deal with him, or I take the win.
Yeah, I think there is nothing else to add there because at this point, the Hydra is basically you are not able to deal with the Hydra. I mean, what can you do? You can use the Scylla and then the
Still
Thanatos.
Thanatos.
Yeah, that's
That's
all
all you
you
can do.
can do. That's all you can do, just to stay alive for this particular turn. But in the long run, you basically know this will most likely not help you.
Your opponent would basically have to find absolutely nothing for the rest of the game in order for you to be successful here. Rushing Thunder, you could play both of them and knock him down to 1 HP. Actually, no, that's an Aegean Outcast for the victory. Actually, switching the 2/3 into the 3/2, finding lethal, where I certainly didn't see it. Maybe Kenny did, but game number 1 is going to be claimed by the Nuwa player, and I want to bring up something a little bit interesting. I want to bring up bans. Kenny, normally Hindu is permabanned in this particular meta, but Swaggosaurus Rex actually has access to him.
Well, what we saw last weekend during the HRX qualifiers is that the Hindu Pantheon was left unbanned quite a lot because sometimes it felt like people were actually expecting the Hindu to be banned, right? So they didn't put much effort into learning it, and they just brought their best free decks to the tournament plus Hindu because it was banned
Right.
anyway all the time. So in the later stages of the tournament, we actually saw some players fall really, really deep with the Hindu, and it felt like they didn't really have the necessary experience because they never expected to play Hindu in the first place.
That's true, and you know what? If I was in this tournament right now, I don't have any Hindu cards, Kenny. I would have just gone into my neutrals, clicked on Ganesh, and put the first 25 cards that I could click on into it like a beast Hindu list just to have Hindu on my docket, knowing nobody will ever see it and nobody will know I just trolled the crap out of everybody because they just banned beast Hindu.
But only if the deck lists are not visible for the public, right?
Oh. Are they visible here? No, they are not. So, you just got trolled. I just brought Beast Hindu, and I'm laughing my way to the bank, knowing that you just banned out a crappy list every single time just because the Pantheon is disgusting.
And that's what a lot of players actually hope for.
Right. And I'm saying that could be a possibility, and maybe that's the conditions that Swaggosaurus Rex finds himself in, and he actually never even shows the Hindu. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because he didn't show Hindu for the first game.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good point. I mean, you can also argue maybe Hindu is his fallback mechanic, right? When he is behind and he
Right.
really wants to win a game. But well, he chooses to not play it again. So I feel like we are pretty on point with our assumption that he's not that familiar or at least comfortable with the Hindu tech to, really put it into action.
Right. And sometimes it is just familiarity and comfortability, even though I don't know that that's a word. Because a lot of times, what you're comfortable with is your best option. Guys, we're getting the game here. Swaggosaurus Rex sitting on the left side of your screen, bringing the Odin against the Zeus of Denim Blue, number 7. Not DJ Zeus, though. Important distinction.
Yeah, DJ Zeus definitely has an advantage over normal Zeus. I completely
Yep.
agree because I run him. But
Yep. You
but
draw Arachne 100% more of the time. True statistics.
yeah, I mean, honestly, as someone who runs DJ Zeus, I would know about that, and I can confirm that's not the case. But okay, I mean, looking at Zeus's hand, right, you see the Arachne, and Arachne is something like, oh, yeah, I see the Arachne.
Yep.
I always want the Arachne, especially against Odin. And I mean, I would be very, very surprised if the Arachne would not come down this turn. Like, even if your
It's
opponent
making
is
him sweat.
able, even if your opponent is able to get rid of it next turn, I mean,
Who
it was
cares?
still an Arachne, right? And it pulled resources from your
Mm-hmm.
opponent just to get rid of this one Arachne.
Turns out that 2-drops on 2 are really, really good.
Especially
And-
2-drops that spawn 1/1s every single
right.
turn are really, really good.
It's a 2/3 for 2, which is, interestingly enough, a very similar stat line to a particular furry friend that likes nuts that's in the Norse pantheon.
Yeah, and
Known
this
as
this play
Rodicaster.
actually this play is really, really important because Zeus is at 3 mana, 4 mana with the mana potion, because this would have been able, to go really, really wrong. If Zeus had the Thanatos in hand, this 3/2 token would have been dead immediately.
Right.
There was nothing you could have done, and at this point you would be behind on board. So it was pretty much a gamble to use the Wind Demon on the token just to get rid of the Arachne and the Spider with the Dagas. But in this particular case, there is nothing Zeus can really do. He can play the Nemesis, just for 1 health and then finish
Right.
off the 3-2 with the Judgment. That's pretty much all he can do at this point.
Nemesis
So,
Judgment is just, it feels awful. On a 3-2? Like, ugh. You don't
yeah,
want to
it
do
feels
that.
it feels it feels really awful, but that's pretty much the only thing you can do in this particular case to have something on board and get rid of the 3-2. I mean, he chooses to not, use the
I like
Nemesis,
that.
and yeah, I would also prefer that, but at this point, you simply don't have any minions on board, and that's the most important thing, and that's why the last turn was actually really, really bad for the Zeus.
And the Lenny's toxic brother does make an appearance here. It's up for debate whether or not this will be played because Scylla does have a good target right now. But personally, if I'm up against a Norse rush list, I don't know that I would pass up the opportunity to throw out Lenny's toxic friend.
I mean, the toxic Hydra is definitely an option right now. But the another thing you have to, keep in mind if you're just looking at Zeus's hand, if you place the Aphrodite, for instance, it has 4 health, and your opponent is most likely not going to be able to get rid of it. So you can deal 2 damage to the 4/4 if it rushes onto your stone, and next turn you are at 5 mana, which would enable the Scylla plus hero power combo. I feel like this will actually be the more oversightful play, but he goes for the 4/4 poisonous card just to contest the 4/4, which we know if we look at Odin's cards will not
Yeah.
be possible.
And this is just the perfect play then for Odin. It's so natural. You play the Tusky that then kills the Poisonous Hydra next turn, and you have the perfect amount of mana to play out that Poisonous. And you might be thinking as a Zeus player, yes, I forced him to spend 2 mana to get rid of the Poisonous rather than play something else. But in reality, we know that he's actually got a whole lot of nothing, and that was actually not that bad.
Yeah, because Tusky is only 3 mana and it provides a lot of
Mm-hmm.
value. If your opponent only has 1 minion on board, you definitely know who it is going to stun, right? And it was the case last turn, and this turn, basically all you can do is get rid of the 1/1 maybe with Scylla to be somewhat competitive in terms of at least attack damage if your opponent wants to trade. But
I think you kill
aside
the
from that,
Tusky. If you buff the Scylla and then kill the Tusky.
yeah, you can actually kill the Tusky, that's right. But in any case, the Scylla is the only play you can go for in this particular turn, but you will still be answered by what Odin has on the table.
Interesting choice there. Chose, instead of the buff, which would have been the more value option, chose to actually play the Nemesis. And this is honestly, he's going to get punished for this because the Frey is going to come out and kill 2 units rather than just one.
Yeah, he went for you know the more minions I have on my board, the better. That's what he went for
Right.
because he's against an Odin and he wants to have as much board control or minions on the board as possible. But in this case, since Freya was in his opponent's hand, he basically played into his opponent. And that's why we see Zeus, struggling really, really hard to just get some kind of board control. And honestly, with the deck list we've been seeing Zeus running, uh, there is no card that can get rid of all those minions immediately. So he's basically trying to delay as much as possible at this point.
Delaying, he is trying to do, and honestly, not too unsuccessful, not partially because of the not really brick draws, but double crippling curse against this particular Zeus board is not the greatest of situations to be in.
Yeah, Crippling Curse definitely gains value when you're playing against a minion that has a lot of health. In this particular case, it's not as significant, but I mean, at this point, as a Odin player, you have managed to get your opponent down to such a low health total. At this point, you can rely on Odin, Zeus having to trade into you. You don't have to
Right.
trade anymore, especially
Right.
with the Runestone of Ire on the board. You just go for the stone and throw everything onto your opponent you possibly can get into your hand.
And now the Artemis, I think, is the only out here for the Zeus player, and he's got to kill the 4/4. Because otherwise there's a guarantee that there will be enough damage from the Odin in order to finish you off. Currently, he's only got 6 damage on board, including his hero power. You've got to kill the 4/4, and then you probably want to kill the 3/1 as well.
I would go for the 2/3 if possible, like the soul, because the 3/1 is something you can actually get rid of easier, and like the one damage you would get on your stone. The one thing you always
Ooh,
have to keep in mind, is that a melee character can always be procced off, but a
ranged
ranged
can't. Yeah.
character cannot be procced off. So that's why you usually go for the ranged character, whatever happens. And in this particular case, he low rolled, unfortunately, which means that he was not able to get rid of the soul, but only the Freya, which means that, yeah, I mean, at this
FG.
point, with the fire giant, it's, well,
GG.
GG.
Yep. That's it right there, because the fire giant has charge, because that is a fun and interesting interaction with that Runestone of Ire, where you get 3 chargers instead of just the 2. And that is a 5/8, dealing 5 damage to face. Soul is gonna tee up and finish it off, and that was I can't even remember who won that game, to be honest. I wasn't looking at the names. Swagasaurus, as my voice cracks, manages to take the game. And
Swag brings us the swag.
Swag does indeed bring us the swag, but I believe Denim Blue took the first game with the Nuwa list, so we're looking at a game 3 here.
Yeah, and I mean, it's very, very interesting. As you said before, those matchups, they can be very, very volatile. And Odin versus Zeus, right? I mean, usually you would assume that Zeus has the upper hand because there's so many answers. But fortunately for Odin, and I think that was really the most important part of this whole game, did not have Thanatos in his hand at the start.
Yes,
If this
I
had
tend to
not
agree.
been the case, the game would look completely different with Zeus having the board control and whatever. But so Zeus took the gamble, Odin took the gamble and won.
Denim Blue then has 2 options for the last game. He can bring out the Zeus or the Odin. Swagasaurus can bring out the Hindu or the North or the Zeus. Swagasaurus showing us the swag with the DJ Zeus, and the regular Zeus of Denim Blue sitting on the other side of the board. Zeus Mirror. Let's go.
Well, Zeus Mirror, I mean, obviously what you're looking at the start of the game is, does one of those Zeuses have Arachne in hand? I mean, that's very, very important, because if one of those has Arachne in hand, then the other one is at a severe disadvantage. Thankfully for either of those players, we don't see an Arachne in either of those hands. So at this point, I would say
You were saying?
you just, yeah, I mean, there is the Arachne. Yeah, the Arachne was just drawn. Yeah, so completely disregard what I just said. The Arachne has been
I
drawn.
always do.
So. but
No,
thankfully, for the Zeus player that did not have the Arachne in hand, the 1/1 token actually enabled Zilla because it spawned in a very, very unlucky spot.
right. Swagasaurus showing us the swag, the luck swag at that point for the. I'm saying to say swag way too much this set. I apologize in advance. Getting the lucky spawn or unlucky spawn. There were only 2 spots out of 5 that were bad spawns for specifically against Asilla, and he takes full advantage of it.
Yeah, at this point, it means that Denim Blue is basically has to get rid of the 4/4 that is sitting onto his stone, because the Scylla, as we know, she will lose her buff next turn and will return to being a 1/2, which is
Right.
manageable and will not be able to kill like quite as much as the 4/4 would have been able to. And since you have a very, very late game focused hand, I mean, it's 2 6 drop, a 5 drop, a 7 drop, you're already at a pretty much severe disadvantage. I think that was definitely the best play, and at this point, you just play the War Behemoth and wait until you can kill the Scylla with the what is it called? The Arfina, right?
Athena, yes. Um, and the opposing hand of Swagosaurus Rex here, we're looking at not enough damage for a Thanatos play. I guess just Brontus and buff.
I mean, you can get rid of the 3/6 on the board if you use
You
the
can.
Judgment, and you can also play the Brontes in the same turn. So I would still advise it because you can play the Brontes, and
I
that's
think
what it does.
yeah, it's going to be
Actually,
Judgment and buff.
actually,
Yeah.
yeah, actually, he decides to just buff and not play the Brontes, which means that for the next turn, he knows that his opponent in Denim Blue will not be able to play pretty much anything that can survive his next turn, right? Because
Right.
free health is more than enough to survive an Athena, as we know. And at 6 health, the only thing that would be possible would be a Judgment plus Thanatos, but we've seen one Judgment already, so it's very unlikely that this is in his hand. So this play was the, I would say, safer play and more calculated play.
And this just kind of shows you how difficult it is for a Zeus to come back when they don't have board. This was the main reason why Zeus didn't see any play for a very long period of time, because you just lost to a lot of different pantheons, and the strength of Mayan in destroying large health units very efficiently also played a part. But the fact that Zeus has trouble coming back from behind is another one.
Yeah, Zeus has always had trouble coming back from behind. And especially in a mirror matchup, you see it more than in any other matchup
Right.
because both players have the same cards at their disposal. And I mean, the one person who actually gains board control usually keeps it for the rest of the game. And just playing anything, on the board right now, anything, means that the Scylla will get another +3/+2 buff because, the Athena will not last this turn, right? The Scylla can just kill it off.
I,
Whether or not the Athena had been played from his opponent, the Aphrodite would have done the same thing. And at this point, the Scylla is 8/1, and your opponent has to get rid of it somehow, which very much limits his options at this point. And
I
you're
feel
already
like I feel like for that reason I would have pushed the Scylla to stone and done 5 extra damage, because you know your opponent has to kill it, and they've got 4 ways to kill it. You've got another Athena, 2 Thanatai, and I suppose you could also argue that Artemis is also a way to kill. I feel like that 5 damage would have been better served going to face.
honestly, no, I personally agree with the play because if you know, deal damage to the face, then she loses her buff. You always want to be snowballing with the Scylla. That's really important because that's the way you make sure your opponent has to answer her somehow. And
Okay.
it's a very safe play, right? It's a very safe play. You know your opponent has to get rid of something that deals 8 damage to your stone next turn. So you can see which answers they possibly have because there is only the Athena Judgment plus maybe another few cards. You know which cards that your opponent can play in order to get rid of it, which means it's very, very safe because you will definitely have board control next turn as well, because you also have 2 other cards on the board that are next to your opponent's summoning stone.
It's looking pretty difficult at this point for Denim Blue. It looks like Swagosaurus Rex has got a stranglehold on this match, and I know we talked about how last game the problem was the Zeus didn't have that one answer, that one Thanatos for the early game. Was there one of those situations in this game where you feel like if only he had had this one card, he'd be in a better spot?
honestly, in this game, if only the Arachne spider would not have spawned in a way that Scylla had been able to kill it, right? Because then
Mhm.
it's just a 1-2. I think that's the main takeaway from this game. The 1-1 spider actually allows Scylla to snowball in this game, which means she is a really big threat. Just a 1-2 on the board is not a threat. And that's why we see so many people actually neglecting her for one turn until she loses her buff. But since she was able to get the 1-1 and was very, very close to the Summoning Stone, it meant that either you get rid of her, which this was not a possibility, or you just somehow play around it, um, which Get Den in Blue was not able to do either. So that was, in my opinion, the most important part, even though it was very, very RNG based and could have gone different ways.
And either way, it looks like this game's going to be wrapping up, and Swagasaurus is probably going to claim this one. Moving on to face Jinaru in the finals here. Jinaru took down Nawatix 2-0, and I know we don't have a. Oh, actually, Artemis. Is there a way to turn this around from this Artemis?
Now, there's no way to turn this around.
Okay. In that case, do you have any final words for us from this particular set before we get set up for finals?
Scylla OP.
There you have it. The expert analysis from my man Kenny on the desk here. Scylla OP. And guys, keep a tight leash on your spiders. Make sure they spawn in the right spots. We'll be back in just a few more minutes here after we set up for the finals. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We are in the finals. My man Swagasaurus Rex over there on the left-hand side of your screen with that Swaggy Zeus, and over on the right-hand side of your screen with the Swaggy Nuwa is Jinaru joining us for the finals today. And it looks like this nice mid-range control Zeus taking on a control Nuwa. Kenny, take me away.
So as I said in the previous matches, Control Nova is really strong in the very, very early game because of the Habwa. If you are able to take control of your opponent's summoning stone, this means that you are most likely winning the game. But if you are not taking control of your opponent's summoning stone, then there is still the opportunity for you to come back with a Guan Yu or anything thereof. And that's basically what we've been seeing here. The Hou just being a really, really big nuisance,
Mm-hmm.
just killing everything that Zeus is playing. And yeah, at this point, basically what I said is coming true. Nuva has the edge, and usually she doesn't give you an inch once she's ahead.
I mean, it's the point where you have to deicide this Hu Yi, and you know this list has got Sun Wukong in it. I mean, bottom line, that Hu Yi is not what you wanted to deicide as Swagasaurus.
Exactly, that Hou Yi is something you want to trade into with your minions, but since you didn't have any minions on board, you were forced into it because you knew everything that you would play at this point would just get rid of, would be gotten rid of by the Hou Yi anyway. So you're basically forced into it, and Nuva has been, you know, having the edge from the start, and she's just exercising it beautifully. She's just pressuring Zeus, knowing that Zeus, has very little cards at his disposal that can actually put him back into the game.
Lenny's gonna hit the board, but there's a Chaos Spawn in hand, and I'm expecting to see it come out here. Chaos Spawn plus Imperial Guard plus keep on smacking that stone because a Silence 5/5 is not the scariest thing in the world.
Right. A silenced 5/5, and you already have a 4/5 on your opponent's stone while he's sitting at just 13
Right.
health. At this point, you know your opponent has to clean up, right? Your opponent cannot afford to just go for your stone and threaten you. Your opponent has to make sure you do not get the necessary damage in, and that's why we see Aokwang just attack the stone and completely disregarding the Neon Hydra.
I mean, at this point, you might want to trade Lenny in and then just go for that Divine Vengeance to clear the board, and I guess then toss out a Brontus. But keep in mind that Dragon King is a card. There's it's a 10 mana deal 8 damage. I don't remember the name of it, but that's also a card.
Inferno.
Inferno. Yeah. So there is tons of damage that Nuwa could draw that literally just win you the game.
Yeah, I mean, usually we see Inferno in more aggressive decks. I don't know if this deck list actually contains one Inferno, but I
It's possible that it
completely
doesn't.
yeah, it's very much possible, and you know that there is definitely a Dragon King in the deck because I mean, who would not play Dragon King? But
Right.
actually, the how he Zeus plays this matchup is very, very interesting. He decides to not get rid of both minions. He just decides to take the damage and
Right.
open himself up to just a lethal just by using the Dragon King. So at this point, Nova can just draw and hope that at some point she gets the Dragon King to finish off the game.
At this point, Nuwa has to be extremely unlucky in order to lose. And that tends to be a pretty good spot to put yourself in. Fire Giant can come out here. You can kill the 5/1 and the 1/2, and then push the 2/3 into the 2/2. While you still also, oh, by the way, you have a Fire Giant on board. There's just tons of options, and Nuwa is sitting pretty.
Yeah, as I said, Nova at this point can just make sure that Zeus has no minions on board, and that's why she trades into directly.
Right.
Because I mean, you can just wait, right? You know, the
Mm-hmm.
Zeus has no minions or anything that will actually increase his summoning stone's health. So he is basically on the clock and needs to win this game somehow with his minions, or Dragon King will finish it off.
And Dragon King does not get a snack today because Swagasaurus realizes that his swag has run out. He can try running back the Zeus next match, and seeing as how much he's leaned on it, I fully expect him to do so. But how do you expect this matchup would go against something a little faster?
You mean
Swagasaurus
Zeus?
is Zeus. Yeah, the Zeus against something a little faster. Gennaro's got a Ra and an Odin, so he could either go for even more of a control option or a much more tempo option.
So I feel like the best chance would probably be against the Odin, in my opinion, because as I said many times before, Zeus has quite a lot of options to deal with low health minions while uh, either buffing his minions or just putting them in a position to threaten your opponent. So yeah, I feel like this is the most favored matchup for the Zeus, and we actually see the Odin. So it feels like Gennaro is like, okay, well, I want to get this Odin out of my way. Just let's wait.
And Odin is indeed the choice, like you said. Talking about early starting hands, though, no 2 drops, but you got a mana potion into a Scotty is not half bad.
Yeah, and there is no 2-drop for Zeus and no 3-drop either. And that's
Ugh.
what really spells doom for Zeus usually. At this point, you're staring down at a 2-3 ranged unit from your opponent who usually wants to overpower you, and you do not have the necessary tools to really contest. At, you have the necessary tool to contest next turn, but since your opponent will be able to play even more, you will be at a disadvantage in terms of board control, most likely for the rest of the game.
Damage Omen gonna come out, clear out the Nemesis just to keep Gennaru ahead on board. Swagasaurus, he's got a Judgment, he's got a Scylla, he's got 4 mana, and that's all he can do.
I mean, realistically, you would really hope, to have a Scylla and 2 mana left, because then you would be able to kill off at least, the Skadi, but it wasn't possible. And I mean, a second Skadi coming down and
Yeah,
buffing and
this is
buffing the Calder means that even with 5 mana, you cannot use your Scylla plus hero ability, which means at this point, well, he has no drops in hand. This is basically great to win.
and at this point that's it, it's coming down to it. Next turn there's a Surtur in hand, which is 8 damage plus 3 damage is 11, 12 damage from hand on the board if that Surtur is able to hit the board. And don't forget there's also an Onzeus, which is an additional 2 damage. So there's 14 damage sitting out there right now, and I think all of it's going to hit the face.
I mean, you get
Maybe
rid
not
of the
all of it.
Scylla. You get rid of the Scylla with the free one because it's all already damaged. Because you also have a lot of board control already. I feel like, I mean, at this point, either it doesn't really matter if it trades into the Scylla, but you want to do it because she actually scales with kills.
Right.
But in any case, you are at such a severe advantage with having 2 Skadis and obviously the 2 Calders in hand that Zeus doesn't really have any answer just to get rid of the board. That is, just to get rid of the minions that are currently on the board, let alone anything that Odin is able to play later on.
Zeus needs annihilation. At the end of the day, Zeus needs to find annihilation, and that is literally impossible. There is a total of 8 damage from the board, and there's at least 2 damage from hand with the minion, with the Cursed Warrior, not to mention the Onzeus, and even if Gennaru had to last until the 8 mana turn, there was a Fire Giant as well. Gennaru is claiming this set in a convincing fashion 2 pretty quick games.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we saw the power of Odin if he actually gets rolling in the early game and your opponent is not able to counter your aggression with any of his low mana drops, because then Odin usually runs away, and you cannot do anything about it because it will just kill you within 5 turns.
Well, guys, that was a quick end to a long day, and we're thankful for you guys for coming out and sticking around through the tournament. Janaru is going to claim the victory, second place going to Swagasaurus Rex, although he's first place for that name in my heart. Guys, thanks for coming out, and we will see you another time.